of the West Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency. Let's start our meeting today with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, the Republic, nation, God, visible, liberty, and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we'll start our meeting as usual with if there's any presentations from the public on matters not on today's agenda. If there's anyone in the audience that wishes to speak at this time, or has there been any correspondence?
There have been no comments.
Okay, thank you. Item 1B, a report on our closed session.
Yes, the board met this morning on one item listed on the closed session agenda, took no reportable action.
Thank you. Item 1C, the monthly and year-to-date review of revenue and expenses.
Good morning, board members and staff. I'll be reporting out on the revenue and expenditures for the month of March 2023. In our O&M Fund 870, the beginning balance was approximately $6.79 million. The agency received $17,000 from special tax assessments, and expenditures totaled $200,000. Majority of that was from the liability insurance premium that we paid recently, and that makes the fund's ending position at $6.6 million. In our CAP Fund 871, the beginning balance was $4.67 million. There was no revenue, and expenditures totaled $588,000. Majority of that was from the Sac River West North geotechnical work and legal work toward the remaining Southport claim that we have going on, making the ending position for Fund 871 to be at $4.08 million. At the end of the month, the combined cash position was $10.81 million, and as of May 8th, the position was at $11.43 million. So the agency did disperse the 2023 flood tax assessments to RD 900 and the city, and that was like in early May, like I think May 2nd. The final construction retention release has been approved and is processing payment. That's approximately $300,000. The final real estate payment, which is going to be around $2.8 million, is in review by management staff. Once these payments are complete, DWR will advance the remaining amount in the construction funding agreement to the agency. So the advance is expected to be approximately $17 million. And the advance managed by the agency will support the agency and DWR as a co-non-federal sponsors for work in kind and the required 5% cash contributions for the federal project. With that, I conclude my report. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Any questions? I just have one, just a clarification of yourself, maybe Greg. This $17 million advancement, that will be used for funding the local share as we go forward?
Yeah, that's correct. And just a quick update, we met yesterday and revised the payment request. So what's actually coming to the agency is approximately, for retention release, is approximately $2.4 million of agency funds as opposed to the $300,000. That's an update from yesterday afternoon. And the balance left on the agreement that will be transferred to the agency for the purpose you just described is closer to $20 million. So we'll be the keepers of that, and we'll work with the state to make our non-federal contributions with those funds.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Jen. We'll move on to our consent items. 3 items today: the acceptance of the comprehensive financial report for fiscal year ending June 30th, consideration of amendment to the contract to Blackburn Consulting, and consideration of approval of our April 20, 2023 meeting minute. Is there any comments or questions on any of the items? Otherwise, I would accept a motion to move the consent agenda.
I just have one quick question on the financial report. Thank you for your work on this. I assume this document is one that goes on our website that is available to the public? Okay, question answered. I'd like to move the consent agenda.
Okay, and I will second that motion. Do I need to have a
A hand vote?
vote roll call, or can we just do it vocally now?
It can be done vocally.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you. Item 5, our regular agenda, consideration of adoption of the WSAFCA biannual administrative and operating budget for capital improvements for years 23-24 and 24-25. Sir.
Good morning, Board. I'm Ted Williams from the city's Finance Department, and I'm going to walk you through the budget. So what we have here is a review of the budget. So it basically functions like a workshop in that regard. However, we do have a resolution available, so you will have the option to adopt the budget if you choose to. If you choose not to, we do have the opportunity to bring this back in the June meeting for adoption at that time. So with that, so what I'm going to do is basically walk you through the financial structure of WSAFCA, looking at each of the funds, and then we'll go a little bit deeper into what's in each of those funds. I'll start with Fund 652, which is not a WSAFCA fund, it's a city fund. Then we'll go into the 800 funds that are WSAFCA funds, and we'll talk about those budgets, the proposed budgets, and the sort of the high points in those. And here we go. So basically, the structure is the operating fund is 870. So that's where all the operating expenses for WSAFCA are. So the agency is staffed, as you all know, the agency is staffed by city employees. They're not directly in 870, they're in Fund 652, and then the expenses are charged into 870. And I'll get into that in more detail in a second. Fund 871 is used for capital projects, and we have 2 funds for debt service, Fund 883 that funds the 2015 bonds, and Fund 884 that handles the 2020 bond. So in Fund 652, basically this table here represents all of the spending for the year. The 2022-2023 numbers are the proposed numbers for the year. So they're not this year's budget. They're where we're projecting to come in. Not proposed, projected, sorry. Basically, in the personnel section, that covers all of the salary and the related expenses for staff that supports the agency. And what you'll see is the increase from 22-23 to the budgeted numbers is due to the FTE. There are currently 4 FTE in the agency. However, it's budgeted for 5. There's 1 vacant position. So the budget contemplates having 5 FTE. So that's what the increase is for. And related, the operation and maintenance is also a little bit higher, basically for that reason, and also a little bit of underspending, for lack of a better term there. It's a generally small number. Now, general support and cost allocation is a number that is basically support costs for all of the various functions in the city that support the flood group and support WSAFCA. So that's an allocation for pieces of IT and finance and the cost of the building itself here in City Hall, et cetera. One of the reasons for the increase is a change in allocation methodology. Basically, we discovered a bit of an oversight in that the flood group was not being charged for any part of City Hall. So we've corrected that. And so that's part of that's the biggest contributor why there's an increase in the general support cost allocation. All right, what you see now is the authorized position list, and I spoke to the 5 FTEs earlier, and that's what they are. Now, what you'll see in that second to last column in the right is something called the ICAP. And for the budget, we had originally forecasted that to be a 50% number, meaning the ICAP rate would be 50% of what the salaries and benefits rate is. Breaking news, it looks like that number is going to be significantly higher. And basically, seeing as how I'm fairly new at this, I'm going to ask Becky Robertson to come up and kind of explain what's going on with the ICAP.
I'll just make a comment. ICAP has always been my boogeyman here to figure out. So.
I know. I figured it would also be a really good morning. So I'm Becky Robertson, finance manager with the city. So I figured it would be kind of a good time to go over the difference between, once again, the general support allocation and ICAP, because I know that's come up in previous years, but it's been a while since we talked about it. So I figured before we kind of delve into the update to the ICAP, we can go over kind of the difference in definition. So the general support allocation is really for the internal service costs that the city has. So it's payroll, HR, city manager's office, finance, IT, facility maintenance, risk management, so the insurance for the city. All of those things that provide service to all of the other funds, but we don't actually generate our own external revenues. And so instead, we allocate our costs to all of the other funds based off of level of service provided. So that's kind of how that number gets generated each year. There's a methodology. So for example, when we are looking at how to allocate our accounts payable staff, every 2 years, we go and look at the prior fiscal year to see how many invoices did we process for each cost center to be able to determine level of service provided. And so that data gets updated every 2 years with the biennial budget. So you'll see kind of with each new biennial, the numbers will shift slightly because we're pulling different data and providing an updated level of service. And that level of service can change from year to year. Now, ICAP, which is the indirect cost allocation plan, is different. And so that ICAP rate is charged to capital projects and grants. And the purpose of that rate is to really bring in the non-salary and benefits costs that are associated with having full-time employees. So when we charge out to a project, that fund gets to recoup kind of their salary and benefits costs. But there's other pieces like operations and maintenance that come with that position. So the ICAP is trying to recover the operations and maintenance costs, which is looking at the Flood Support Services Fund, about that $24,000 mark annually, plus trying to recover that general support allocation, because that is an indirect cost that doesn't get reimbursed when you're only looking at salary and benefits. So ICAP's really trying to capture all of the non-salary and benefits to reimburse the fund that's providing that service. Of course, I wrote this agenda report a couple of weeks ago. We have recently, as of yesterday, the Flood Support Services staff didn't even know, had a draft calculation for what we think the 23-24 ICAP rate is going to be. Initially, I did this kind of expecting it to be stable, but once we were able to go and look at the numbers and calculate that new rate, it's actually going to be a lot higher. So in the report where I wrote a lot about how I'm trying to mitigate doing a large year-end true-up and ways to kind of offset that, with this higher ICAP rate, that likely will not even be needed. With the Flood Support Services staff charging out their time to capital projects and to some of those internal work orders that we created years ago, so that we can more regularly start to collect revenues for time not directly spent on a capital project, but really for the overall flood support service, that likely will generate enough revenue that we would not need a true-up. And we very likely end up in the situation we have in the last few years, where the City Flood Support Services Fund has a surplus at year end where we collected more than our actual costs were, at which point we would return that surplus to a SAFCA. And that's kind of why we created those internal work orders so that we don't end up with a large true-up, that we are able to more accurately account for what our costs are each month. So with that, I will let you guys ask me any questions you may have before I swap it back to Ted.
I'll start.
Okay.
Just like follow it right. You're right. A lot of time that our staff is doing is on capital projects. So we are billing those capital projects at a certain rate, right? Which what is that rate? Is that the total rate after you put a ICAP in there, or is it?
So looking at this current fiscal year, when we charge out to a capital project, we receive reimbursement for 100% of the salary and benefits based off of the number of hours charged to the capital project. In addition, our current ICAP rate is just over 49%, so we also charge and get reimbursement for an additional 49% to recover some of the non-salary and benefits costs associated with that employee.
So then that gets paid to 652.
Correct.
And then so you go through the year, there's stuff that's not a capital project, which that's what the contribution from our 870 would come in at some time to cover, and then you reconcile it all on an annual basis.
Correct. Yeah. Each year, the City Support Services Fund must reconcile down to zero. So whatever our actual expenses are is the maximum amount of revenue that fund can receive, and any surplus is returned.
So the ICAP amount for flood services is unique to it?
No, it's actually, so the ICAP rate is citywide. So to the primary employees, which is typically going to be our city capital projects team, as well as the transportation division and community development. Those are the primary staff that charge out to capital projects and grants. So it's their time that gets looked at when calculating what the ICAP rate would be.
Okay.
And so that figure is for citywide. It's for any city employee who is working on a capital project or a grant.
Okay.
That same percentage.
I think I get it.
Can I add a little something, if you don't mind?
Yeah, go for it.
Just because you may be wondering why we're using capital projects and not flood staff to do the ICAP rate. But that the ICAP is, it's a federal rate. So we follow federal methodology, and we have to have that rate approved by our federal cognizant agency, which is, in some cases is Caltrans. It's whoever we're getting the most of our federal funds from. And so we have to follow their methodology. And so as a city, we utilize our capital projects staff. So the ICAP rate is never really going to tie directly to like WSAFCA or the city flood staff charging out, which is why we end up having that true up. But it's not something that we're creating either. We're following a federal methodology. That rate gets charged, and then at the end of the year, that's where we end up having that true up. Between 870 and 652.
And then that rate is acceptable to our other partners, whether it's the state or
absolutely,
or whatever.
yes.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
That methodology, does it change year to year?
For the general support allocation, or how we calculate
ICAP.
no, so the calculation is the same, but the data it's looking at will change from year to year.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. See, it takes a village to get us through a budget. So, okay, so this is Fund 870. And again, this chart actually captures all the dollars. I think you have some other exhibits that have it in a more traditional spreadsheet format. But the high points here are, well, basically, let me just walk you through what's in each one of these boxes. O&M, operating, O&M distributions is the, oh, I got stuck. Revenues that go out to the reclamation districts, RD 900 and 537. Other operations and maintenance is just your regular kind of operating costs that are directly to 870. So it's the activity of the WSAFCA group, such as lobbying, legal expenses, et cetera, et cetera. City support costs, we talked about, these are not billable to capital projects, but they're other costs. And, given what we just talked about with the ICAP, this may be a smaller number. Debt service is pretty straightforward. That's just interest and principal on our debts. Then the last number, the operating reserve policy, we've basically got a policy to maintain 1 year's worth of operating and administrative expenses as a fund balance, and then anything in excess of that is swept over to 871 for capital project. Any questions on any of that? Next is just a list of the actual projects that are proposed for the year. And that is basically it for my presentation. The assessment revenue that goes into 652 and ultimately funds pretty much everything is going proposed to go up 2%, which is what we're allowed to do. The expenses are generally going up about 3%. And other than that, no change to staffing is being proposed. And, we talked about the ICAP and how that will affect the year-end true-up and that. So, I will.
That
Yeah.
open position, is that the engineer?
Yeah, that's correct. And as we transition from, WSAFCA-led program now to a core-led program, we're holding that position sort of in reserve to see what we're going to need to support.
Okay, I can do that. Okay. So the conversation was, in light of the significant change in the ICAP, we're actually not going to ask you to adopt this today. We'll bring it back for adoption.
Okay.
And then to add to that, just because it will kind of change quite a bit as to how I was going to mitigate things, likely once I incorporate that ICAP rate into what we see for both the city fund and kind of how that then causes a change in the operating fund for WSAFCA, it would be helpful to kind of be able to see what that impact really is. And I think it will end up being that we might see a surplus and be returning funds back to WSAFCA. So it kind of changes the dynamic as to the situation a couple weeks ago when I wrote the report. So a couple of options, I guess, that we would love your feedback. When we do those updates and come back in June, would you prefer us to place it on consent, knowing that that will really be the only thing that's changing? Or would you like a new presentation to kind of walk through how that affected the budget?
I would say maybe do that presentation. Okay. We are missing a board member today, and she may have some questions. Maybe you can brief her off beforehand just a little, but I think that would be proper. But it doesn't have to be as extensive. Just show us the changes, and we can move from there.
Thank you.
Okay. There are no other questions?
One question.
Yeah.
Thank you for the summary of changes sheet. Love it. The increases in salary, is that cost of living? Thank you.
So a good portion of the increases in salary. So there are some MOUs that are already in place that do have increases as of July 1st of 23. Local 39 being the one that would affect the flood support services staff. The other big piece is going to be the PERS. So what? Oh, and workers' comp. Both of those increased. PERS because we had, as of June 30th of 22, they had a significant difference from what they anticipated the investment return to be on the portfolio. And so that triggers, 2 years later to see some bigger changes in what the pension costs are going to be. The other piece for the city side is going to be the OPEB, so the other post-employment benefits, which is paying our retirees for their medical reimbursement based off of their MOU at the time in which they retired. So that pension is, or the OPEB is fully funded, is at 103%. And so it kind of gives us the opportunity to do things a little bit different. And so one of those is to do our out-of-pocket, where we continue to pay the retirees while contributing to our OPEB trust, and then actually reimbursing ourselves at year end for those costs. And so that does have a slight change or increase to the expenditures, because we're paying the employees while paying the trust, but we're going to recoup half of those costs. Yes, so the negotiations for the unions that do not currently have an MOU that kind of crosses into the next fiscal year, that's not included in this. So those would be brought forward once the city council actually approves the MOU.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Okay. We'll move on to item 6A, the WSAFCA project update.
Oops, thank you, Chair Ramos and board members. I'll just go through a few of the items that's in your packet. We already talked about the funding agreement closeout with the state and a couple of changes. In fact, we just got another email from the state. There's going to be another small change. So we'll report out next month. Hopefully all the dust settles and we'll have some accurate numbers. But it's not changing by much. On the Southport Restoration Project, we've been monitoring the river levels. And as you see, every time you go over the bridge, water levels are still pretty high. So the restoration areas are still inundated. No maintenance going on out there. And at current water levels are about 18 feet at I Street and holding steady. Presumably it's due to the warm weather and snowmelt and runoff. So tracking that. But it looks like it's going to be well into the summer before we actually get to having to do any on-the-ground maintenance out there. And it will still remains to be seen what we're going to need to do, perhaps if anything, for providing additional water out there. So that may be the silver lining in that. On the federal project side, the Corps is in the process of closing out the design agreement. That's what we were working under for design of Yellow Bypass, East Levee, North and South. And as part of that closeout, they've requested an additional $570,000. The state's going to make that payment as part of the cash request. And the request that was previously made for construction of $1.3 million, the state is still planning to make that cash payment as well as soon as the design agreement payment is closed out. So our other non-federal sponsors still stepping up to make those cash payments, which is fine by us. Yellow Bypass East Levee, the notice to proceed was issued May 1st to Nordic. As pointed out in the report, their bid came in just under $4 million, which is half of the engineer's cost estimate and it's less than 25% of the project cost estimate for that REIT. So hopefully that continues with Yellow Bypass North project, which is scheduled to go out to bid May 26th. And then contract award is anticipated mid-August. For the construction on Yellow Bypass, we're expecting to have a groundbreaking event third or fourth week of June is what we're targeting. Dates to be determined, but we'll reach out to the board and let you know where those land and or get availability if we can try and focus it to when the board is available. Also trying to coordinate with Congresswoman Matsui for her attendance as well. And then in August, the Corps is planning a region-wide type of groundbreaking event, not only which will highlight the WSAC project, part of the SAFCA project for the weir widening, which is next up for them. And that's expected to have several congressional delegates and be a big event. So again, in August, we'll keep you updated on the dates so you can attend if able. On the design effort for the Sac River West North Levee, the Corps is working on the geotechnical basis of design report, which now that you've approved the contract amendment with the BCI, they'll be in a position to help review for the for the agency. But all of the groundwork, if you will, the borings have been done and completed. At this point, we're not anticipating any more, at this point anyways. Let's see. We're gearing up to have some discussions with the Army Corps relative to the Bridge District and Pioneer Bluff areas, the high ground areas, on how we're going to treat those segments for any remediation, and to delineate where the levee prism lies, where the flood interests lie, and where they don't. Kind of defining a line landward of the edge of the existing features where there's a buried levee prism underneath. On the design proper for Sac River North segments 1 and 2, the northernmost segments, that's anticipated to kick off in June. Thus far, the Corps has provided the H&H data to help with that effort. Obviously, the geotechnical basis of design report is going to help with that effort. But the formal hydraulic basis of design is not anticipated, and that's going to be for the entire project to cover all reaches. That's not anticipated to be complete until December of this year. But the Corps will have the data they need to do the design for segments 1 and 2 of Sac River North. And that's about all I had to cover. Happy to answer any other questions that you have.
Okay. Any other questions? We look forward to the start of more construction. That'll be great. So with that, we move on to item 6B, Director's Comments.
Have we met since Cap to Cap?
No.
This is our first meeting back from Cap to Cap.
Correct.
I just want to thank the team and Paul for all of the work that went into preparing us to go to Cap to actively advocate for flood protection in West Sacramento. And I know a lot of work goes into working on the teams and months of committee work and making sure that West Sacramento's voices are at the table. And it was very clear to me reading the policy papers that West Sacramento was at the table. So thank you very much for doing that. And thank you for the one-on-one time you gave me, Paul, during Cap to Cap to update me and share with me maps. I just really appreciate the work that is being done and the thoughtful effort you're making to give me a little extra time to get caught up on everything. Thank you.
Very good. Sounds like, Paul, you did a good job. You know, one of the facts is that Cap to Cap was born for advocacy for flood protection for Sacramento. So it goes back that far. So that was the original intent. So that's always a big part of the mission. So, okay. Without any other comments, I'll say that this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.